Okay, thank you everybody. I'm back on stage, happy to be in the limelight again. And we have one final main panel today before we break away into two roundtables. So if we can take our seats, ladies and gentlemen, in the middle of the room. Okay. The spotlight discussion that we have now is global food security in times of crises. So we are living in times of crises at the moment. Thank you. And with me to discuss the impact that the food crisis is having in the Middle East and in North Africa and in other parts of Africa are three very distinguished guests, three experts in their fields. First of all, on stage with me, next to me, is Nada El Majoub, the Executive Vice President of Performance and Management at OCP, which is a major Moroccan fertilizer producer. And then we have two speakers joining us online. Thank you very much for being with us. First of all, on the left-hand side of the screen, or the screen that I can see, we have Apollos Nouafor, who is the Vice President for Policy and State Capability at AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. I think it's known just as AGRA now, but it's ultimately an organization trying to boost Africa's capacity to feed itself in a more green and sustainable way. So just give us a quick thumbs up if you can hear us, Apollos. Apollos? Yes, fantastic. And I'll ask the same to you, Carla Montesi, who's the director Director for Green Deal and Digital Agenda at DG INTPA, that's at the European Commission. So INTPA is the kind of the development, the wing of the European Commission, but we don't call it development anymore, we call it international partnerships. So there we go. So to kick us off, I think it would be good for Apollos to tell us a bit about the food situation in Africa at the moment. I mean, Africa, it's not like one country, it's a continent, right? So some parts are struggling more than others in terms of feeding themselves. I know there's problems with the drought in the east of Africa, in the Horn of Africa, and obviously countries in the north, like around Morocco. I mean, they have lots of dependencies on Ukraine and Russia for wheat. So Apollos, maybe you can give us a bit of an overview of the situation, the food security situation at the moment.
Thank you, and a good afternoon or evening or morning to everyone. Thanks for having me here. I think, first of all, like you said, Africa is a continent with different countries. I mean, we've got 5 geopolitical regions from the north, east, west, central, and south. And across these regions, the stories have some similarities, but also some key differences. Like you had earlier said, we know that of the 20 countries that depend on wheat imports from Russia and Ukraine, and to some extent Belarus, at least 12 of them come from North Africa. The remaining 8 of them come from sub-Saharan Africa as well. The current situation is showing that across sub-Saharan Africa that food prices have increased. They had increased for staples like maize, soybean, rice by about 13.2% as of January this year. But the market prices are showing that they've actually increased by 30%. So purchasing power has actually taken a deep dive amongst the people, consumers. There's also been issues around nutrients and the quality of food. And because of the crisis, there's been more focus on the ability to eat rather than the ability to eat nutritious food. The third issue is that we've seen that quite a number of governments, have actually, taken taking up a subsidy program for inputs like fertilizers and in some cases seeds, because Ukraine and Russia actually, export a lot of the ingredients for fertilizers, and in some cases actually fertilizers in itself. And what this has meant is that fertilizer prices have increased by over 65%. And in some cases, it's over 120% for most of the countries in Southern Africa, except in South Africa itself. And what that means is that the subsidy program requires governments to actually put in monies for guarantees for these fertilizers, working with private sector or the banks in some cases, because it's been difficult to de-risk agricultural financing, unlike infrastructure, where it's actually easier for the banks, to back up with either credit notes, or some form of collateral for those financing facilities. And we know that a number of these countries, or more than 75% of these countries, have either gotten to, the limits of which they can borrow, or actually on the brink of the maximum debt, they can hold. And because of that, it's actually more expensive, or more costly rather, for these countries to borrow, because their credit ratings have dropped. So what that means is that they are spending more to borrow for these subsidies, and it's going to be quite difficult, or quite a strain on their economies as they try to pay back. And you know what this means? It means that they're going to start with debt servicing, in trying to service, the interest, and then of course paying back the capital. So it's quite a difficult situation, but there's hope. There's hope because we've seen countries like Nigeria, countries like Zambia, who have actually, and of course Morocco itself, who have fertilizer plants now, and it means they're producing more for the domestic markets, But the other thing we've seen is that, for example, Nigeria produces, but it's producing more for countries like Brazil, like the United States, because they've actually gone ahead to pay, for even these fertilizers that are, yet to be produced. What that means is that the domestic market does get a share, but a lot of African countries are still lacking fertilizer. So, for example, we've seen that Ghana's access to fertilizers has reduced by more than 50%. And yet, its neighbor, Nigeria, produces fertilizer, but the market is more for the external market outside Africa. So these are some of the complexities, with the food security situation. And of course, maybe finally, just one more thing to say that, across the continent, there is, governments are coming together, within the African Union, to actually address that. So we've seen the African Union demonstrate very good leadership, in setting up a food security committee to support the member states, to address the crisis.
Okay, thank you, Apollos. That was a fantastic overview, very interesting, and also, terrifying. Although you do say there is hope, but how the economic crisis is making it so much harder for African countries to actually respond to the food crisis, and of course, all these different problems are interlinked. But you talked about this question of fertilizer, local fertilizer production in Africa, and the fact that a lot of it is exported, and I suppose that's the globalized system that we have. That the fertilizer is then exported to the major countries like Brazil, which then export food and comes back to Africa. So I'm not sure, whether that really makes sense as a system. But obviously we have Nada, on the panel physically here with us. So I want to turn to you now and ask you, how is OPC responding to this crisis in terms of, are you increasing the amount of fertilizer that you give to countries to the south of you, or are you now having to prop up European farmers who are also finding it harder to afford fertilizer? So are you seeing those calls to say keep African fertilizer in Africa?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying that I'm very happy to be here. So thank you to Politico for inviting us and giving us the stage to say our piece and what we think about this unprecedented crisis that we are all living in. Before I address your question, let me just start by probably setting the scene on what it is that we're witnessing. Like Apollo rightfully mentioned, when we think about ag commodities, particularly in the context of the Ukraine-Russia war, we tend to think about oils and crops and energy and gas and what have you. But we sometimes tend to forget about fertilizers. And fertilizers, as a matter of fact, are ag commodities, like he rightfully pointed out. The other context element that we also tend to forget is that this situation was dire to begin with. The war, when it broke out, made worse a situation that was already challenging to begin with. The prices started rising right after COVID, and they kept, actually they doubled for most of the agricultural inputs. And then when the war broke out, indeed they took an exponential upward trajectory. So to address your question more directly, I think we can summarize the challenges that the industry is facing today in two folds. There's an affordability challenge and there's an availability challenge. And to some extent, the affordability challenge is actually a consequence of the availability challenge. The availability challenge is, indeed, the situation supply demand-wise was already dire, like I said. From a supply standpoint, after the Chinese export ban, there was a big portion of fertilizers that were put off the grid. The Russia-Belarus also the situation was about basically made the potash less available to a lot of countries on the planet, particularly to the most vulnerable ones, like Africa, like Apollos was mentioning. So there's that on the supply side. On the demand side, because of the economic recovery happening right after COVID, there was indeed demand, particularly from the big importing regions like Brazil and India with their low inventories. So that supply-demand situation, drove
there's less fertilizer swilling around on the world markets.
Exactly.
And also there's a bigger need for fertilizer at this very moment.
Exactly. And to take our particular situation, when the war broke out, you have to know that half of our ammonia sourcing used to come actually from that region. And so out of the blue, overnight, we lost half of our portfolio of ammonia. Thankfully, because of our reputation, because of our size on the market, we managed to replace those tons from other parts of the world, from Trinidad and from the Middle East. And that's how we kept our plants running. That's how we kept our, like I said, reputation of a reliable supplier to make sure that we put those valuable inputs on the market. But that was a challenging situation. But concretely, what OCP did is kept the plant running.
Okay.
Very important. Did not, maximize our output to the best of our ability to make sure that we kept putting those DAP, MAP, TSP, and PSS, those fertilizers on the market. That's the.
You will remain a massive exporting company. You're not going to turn inwards and only, there's no sense that you're going to turn inwards or only supply neighboring countries to Morocco. You're still remaining a company which is going to, sell all across the world to wherever.
We're a global company with a global footprint. We have 160 clients around the planet, and just for your reference, Morocco in terms of fertilizer consumption is rather a small market, and we are indeed the world's largest exporter of pea-based fertilizing solutions. So, as a response to the crisis, we did many things. The first one is, like I said, keep securing the raw material. And thankfully, we were successful in doing that. The second one is maximize our output, kept our plants running at the usual utilization rate. The third one is accelerating our capex plans. We had capex plans, capacity expansions that were already in the pipeline before the war, but when the war broke out, we did what we could to accelerate them. And as a matter of fact, there are 3 million tons that are coming on stream in the next few months as a consequence of that. The fourth one, and that's probably going to loop back with what Apollos was saying, is that, we no matter what the market configuration is, we ring fence a portion of our portfolio to Africa. Because indeed, we deem it is a vulnerable region, 20%. About 20% of our portfolio goes to Africa. Like I said, about the availability, because of the availability challenges that I was mentioning, the prices are high, the volumes do not go to the lowest willingness to pay regions. And so Africa is left behind in terms of access to fertilizer. So what we did is keep those volumes flowing there, keep 20% of our portfolio going there. And exceptionally, we also went about doing a relief program of more than 500,000 tons of fertilizers. That's about 16% of the continent's needs. That's about a quarter of what we used to send to Africa. to make sure that we help in this very particular situation.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I also just want to make a quick parenthesis to remind people that I do receive your questions that you put on this Swapcard app. I will receive them here. Whoops. So we have only 15 minutes left. So if you want me to ask, if you want to ask a question to the panel, then please log on and ask that. But now obviously maybe we should try and have some shorter answers. I mean, so far it's been very interesting, but I also am aware that time is passing. So maybe we can make it a bit snappier and turn to you, Carla, from the European Commission. I mean, just to carry on the theme of fertilizers, I think that is the theme of this panel so far. Anyway, we're seeing a lot of international initiatives now. There was something called the Save Crops operation announced by France and the World Bank and a bunch of other international bodies at UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly, last week. Does the European Commission also have a plan to boost fertilizer production in Africa? And also a second question, I mean, is that really the solution? I know Africa on average, spreads less fertilizer than, heavily industrialized parts of the world like the US or parts of European agriculture. But is that really the solution, just fling loads of fertilizer at the soil, or could that not have negative impacts later on down the line? Oh, we can't hear you, I don't think. Carla?
Yes.
Maybe you're on mute.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yes,
okay,
it's fine. Good afternoon to you all. And in fact, it was my intention to be with you in the stage, but COVID blocked me in Brussels. But it's a really pleasure to participate in this discussion. Maybe allow me to start with what Apollos said about the global food crisis, because what I wanted to underline that we are in a global food system crisis that was worsened by, of course, Russian aggression against Ukraine. But I would say that the war in Ukraine has definitely caused a spiral of food insecurity. But Russian action just added fuel to a food system fire that was already burning for years. So we have this crisis, but of course we need also to pay attention that the food crisis that is there is also linked to conflict, climate change, economic shock that have in some way eroded the resilience of food system around the world. And today, as Apollos said, we have more than 200 million people that are in food crisis in the 45 countries, if I look at to the last date. Why I'm saying that? Because I think when we are preparing the reaction, when we are operationalizing the answer to this crisis, we need pay attention to the food system. This is our key issue and our key proposal. So at the moment, ourselves as the European Union, we are operationalize, I would say, a comprehensive response to this crisis that is based on different strands of action. Could be the humanitarian aid, so helping to deliver local food to the population that are much needed, the macroeconomic support, but also investment in sustainable food production system. Of course, also there is the component on facilitating trading and the open market. But I want to mention this because we have just engaged another 600 million to support our African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, in addition to all that we have engaged for the Mediterranean region. But really focusing on supporting families and the country by local food, but even I would say, in strengthening food system resilience and the food autonomy. And it is, for me, I would like to link these elements with what you said about fertilizer. What is I would say, the real solution? Because when we talk about fertilizer, our problem is, our priority is that we want to look to the soil fertility solution. So we know very well that now this fertilizer challenging has become the political attention, unfortunately has kept all the attention from the real crisis. But we think that we need to avoid to enter in a what we call it a fertilizer tunnel vision. So we really want to focus on a comprehensive soil fertility approach, and to recognize just that fertilizer are just one element in the complex puzzle of agricultural production, because of course fertilizer are an important factor, but we know very well that the production of food and ensuring food security are subject to many other factors like water, organic matter in the soil, quality seed, climate, access to finance, rural infrastructure, and etc. So we really need to ensure that we have balanced investment on sustainable fertilizer use, and also our priority is continuing to focus on the agroecological approach, really on the point to reduce the dependency that you have just mentioned, that were just mentioned by many African countries. Sorry, over to you. I was maybe too long.
No, that was good, and it brings us on to another question. We're not just talking about fertilizers on this panel, but we are talking about just food security in general, and it's interesting to have you two on the screen, because the European Green Deal really does have aspirations to have a global impact. It's not just something about changing European agriculture, but it wants to encourage, urge, to twist the arm maybe of other countries around the world to do better and to do more sustainable forms of food production. Apollos, do you think that when Carla is talking about needing to apply fertilizers in a sustainable way, when Europeans come to Africa and they give money and they have big programs to fight hunger and things like that, how do you respond to that? How do you respond to the Green Deal? Do you feel like it's being done with you on site? Are you being consulted on it, or is it something which is kind of being imposed upon you a little bit?
Great, thanks. I think Carla has made some very excellent points, around agroecology, sustainability, issues around resilience, and of course dealing with climate. I think one of the things we've always known is that most of the arable land globally sits in Africa. I mean, we've always used 65% because that's the last statistics, but I think that's being eroded now, and that's an issue. So the Green Deal has come at a good time, to support not just the EU, but also Africa in ensuring that we're keeping what's left of our arable land. Because if Africa cannot feed itself, it's not an African problem. It's going to be a global crisis, for food security and nutrition in the continent. So I believe the Green Deal holds a lot of promise for Africa as well as the EU. But I think what's important are three things. One is that we need to consider the fact that the financing architecture between Africa and the EU is actually different. They are like parallel lines. They don't meet. So the question is, we need to rethink the financing architecture for the Green Deal to ensure that it's a win-win for the EU and Africa, because it holds a lot of promise. Secondly, is the fact that there needs to be much more deeper understanding at the political level, on what the Green Deal brings, to drive economic growth. Because let's remember that food systems is not necessarily a product of economic growth. It's actually a driver of economic growth. And we need to make that case much more clearly for Africans to understand why the Green Deal is important, for economic growth within the continent. And a third issue is actually to consider the fact that this is a partnership, we probably need to think about the fact that, the old ways of providing development aid support needs to change. It needs to change from conditionalities to partnerships. And this is important. And it's important because understanding that these governments have very clear economic and political agenda to drive their economies, and that the Green Deal becomes, a vehicle for driving that, rather than a conditionality, for driving, if, for want of a better phrase, driving certain interests. So I think it's important that we understand that the Green Deal brings a lot to the African continent in driving food security, especially in the areas of climate and resilience, agroecology, as well as nutrition, and ensuring that we're keeping Africa's arable land, for the future. Because look, let me say this very clearly. The world has borrowed from the future to pay today's debt. So the future is already owing, not just today. And the Green Deal is one of the critical vehicles, to ensure that we're able to buy back the debt of the future, so that we're keeping tomorrow's world safe, generally. So I think if we do address these three things this way, then we will be able to move forward, on an equal partnership level to ensure that the Green Deal, is able to make impact in the continent.
Carla, can I just come to you again, quickly here, because Apollos is talking about the need to. I know your Directorate General is called international partnerships, but what would you say to us to convince us that you are doing, that when you're in Brussels or when your officials are, running around the world, you are doing this on a sort of equal basis with African partners. You're not just rocking up in Africa with 600 million euros and saying, okay, here's some for you, here's some for you, here's some for you. What evidence, what arguments can you use to show us that this is a new approach to humanitarian food security funding that you're deploying?
Okay, many thanks. And we had a different occasion with Apollos to share our vision. Allow me to say, the European Green Deal is the European top political policy ambition that we have in Europe. We are not obliged the world to go into the Green Deal. What we really we have put ourselves some condition. We were talking about fertilizer in the Green Deal. We have European Union is committed ourselves to reduce fertilizer by at least 20% by 2030. So it's our EU obligation, it's EU commitment. What we find is that around the world, we have the same challenges. And I will say that the current crises are the best argument for changing the food system. We have seen that the energy crisis underline the need to move away from the fossil fuel-based fertilizer. The environment crisis that we are seeing the television every day underline the need that we cut emission. We underline the need that we choose to go in more scale nature-based approach. We underline the fact that we need more inclusivity and equality. So this is the kind of the format, it's a kind of vision that we want to share with our partners. And this is really about partnership, because we are not imposing, but when you look to what I said, the big package of the 600 million just we have decided at the moment, this is about increasing local production, increasing investment, supporting programs that are the choice of the different governments in Africa around the world. It's activities that are corresponding to their choice about how we can increase agriculture. And we focus on one of the big choice that one of the big initiative that it's coming from Africa. One of the big initiative it's the Great Green Wall, for example, and we are with the 600 million supporting different projects that are part of the African initiative about the Green Wall. Just to give it to you one example. So we really believe in partnership. What we want to share, we share the same challenges. Let's see if we can share the same path to give an answer to these challenges or to face these global challenges.
Okay. We only have 1 minute left. I want to give you the floor here. I mean, I don't know. I mean, one of the things that I will take away from today is that farmers are very dependent on fertilizers and chemicals. Of course, they need them. Crops need certain amounts of nutrients to grow. That's just a scientific fact.
Right.
But I also kind of take away the fact that economic crises and food crises are so interlinked that I wonder whether in 20, 30, 40 years from now, farmers will just be having to be using fertilizers in a much more sparing way. And what does that mean for OCP in the long run? Is that a future that you're actually quite worried about? Because
Not at
maybe
all.
it means your business model is on the way out.
No, not at all. We don't worry about that at all, as a matter of fact. But before I turn to your
Yeah.
question, I just want to say a couple of things, because there are a lot of things that both Apollos and Carla said that found echo in our strategy. Apollos talked about the arable land, the 65% of arable lands in the world that actually are in Africa, and mentioned that it is probably an underestimation, and I tend to agree. And he mentioned also the fact that partnerships between the European Union and Africa need to move away from conditionality to partnerships, and I wholeheartedly agree. Carla also mentioned about the importance of investments and in capacity building and innovation to make sure that those food systems, and again, indeed, there are food systems, they are not just about fertilizer, but about a holistic view, a systematic view on the whole food systems in Africa, but not just in Africa. That also is very much in line with the way we think about food security in general, and we think about our role to help to make our contribution as a company as big as it can to help towards that global goal of food security. And we do think that the Green Deal, because we mentioned it, and is something that is absolutely part of the solution, and we subscribe to it wholeheartedly. And it's not a sacrifice, it's not an effort that we make, it's just because it makes sense. It's not just about bringing more fertilizers out there and bringing more tonnages to the market. It's about making sure that every single actor, every single stakeholder of the value chain uses them wisely. And so that goes, it's made possible through training, through knowledge, and putting that training and that knowledge in the hands of the farmer, which is something that we can do, particularly in Africa, where we have a bunch of programs, and I don't want to bore you with the detail because of the lack of time, but we do have a lot of programs that help the farmer know exactly the right combination of the nutrients and micro and macronutrients that they need given their soil type, the crop that they grow, their climate pattern, the water availability. And so it's about customization, it's about customizing exactly the right formula that is needed. So it's about specific and sustainable agriculture. Alongside, making sure that at the end of the day we have enough fertilizer to grow food for the 9 billion people that we're going to be in a few decades. So to your point of whether or not sustainability comes as a threat to our business model, as a matter of fact, it's quite the contrary, because we define ourselves being in the business of sustainability. We define ourselves in being the company that builds its business model to make the most sustainable fertilizers that innovation and science and all of us together can come up with to solve for food security.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, for the answer there. Thank you so much for joining me. Just before I properly thank you, just want to let you know that the next discussions are going to be two very interesting ones that my colleagues are running. One is on the future of meat. That's with Bartosz in the Manilev room. And then we'll also be talking about what I think is a very undercovered topic, especially because we've had a couple of Manils today, but the question of more inclusive agriculture. So Louise, our sustainability reporter, will be talking about the nexus of gender and farming and agriculture policy. But I really want to thank our panelists, Apollos, Carla, even though you've been ill or you had COVID recently. I'm not sure if you've still got COVID, but thank you so much for joining us. And Nada as well, thank you for coming to Paris to be with us on stage. Let's give a big hand to our panelists. As I said, there's two more roundtables going on, but that marks the official end of our day today, apart from the two roundtables, which I encourage you to go to, and you can participate in those roundtables and debate and talk about what you've learned so far today and apply that to the questions of more inclusive agriculture and cellular meat. So go for it. Brilliant.
Thank you, Eddie.
Thanks.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.